Hello and welcome to our Legislative Advocacy Workshop. My name is Heather Fazio. I'm the Director of Texans for Responsible Marijuana Policy, and we are excited about the upcoming legislative session. Our legislature only meets every 2 years, and so this is our big opportunity with the legislature convening now for 140 days. This is our chance to get good laws passed and to repeal bad laws as well. A lot of our work is surrounding grassroots mobilization and grassroots action. We have a huge movement in the state of Texas because the people of Texas are tired of prohibition. They've seen how these policies are failing and they're ready for a new approach. Today, we're going to talk about opportunities for engagement, how the legislative process works, as well as crafting testimony and making sure that we're being meaningful advocates at the Capitol. A lot of the work that we do is with our coalition partners. We've got about 25 different groups that we work with that span the political spectrum, bringing folks together on an issue upon which they agree. And when we're living in such an incredibly politically polarized time, this is important now more than ever. So we have grassroots action that we generally engage with. Today, we're going to talk about the COVID restrictions that are in place and how things are going to be a little bit different this session. But in large part, what we've been able to do is help work with advocates across the state, whether it's veterans, patients, caregivers, medical professionals, attorneys, current and former law enforcement, all working together on this issue, working to repeal marijuana prohibition, or at minimum, decriminalize small amounts and allow patients safe and legal access to this medicine. Here you see some of the pictures of the great advocates that have worked on this issue over the years. With regard to grassroots action, traditionally we host educational exhibits, legislative briefings, citizen lobby days, which are going to be a little different this year. We provide resource materials for lawmakers, facilitate meaningful testimony during committee hearings, and direct action at the Capitol. That's usually what we do. This year, again, is going to be a little bit different. Jax with Texas Normal is going to be talking about the different restrictions that are in place at the Capitol now, how that's going to change our work, and how we're going to overcome those challenges to ensure that lawmakers understand this issue well. This is one of the educational exhibits at the Capitol. We will be doing that again this year if they allow us. It will be unmanned, but these are the kinds of pieces of information that lawmakers need to hear and see. And so we're going to be hosting that again at the Texas Capitol this session. So I mentioned earlier some of the things we're going to talk through. We're going to talk about our objectives, the Texas marijuana policy objectives that we hold. We're going to talk about how a bill becomes a law. What does that process look like, and how can citizens participate? Meeting with lawmakers, crafting your testimony, the legislation that's already been introduced relating to cannabis here in Texas, the Capitol restrictions relating to COVID that are in place. And we'll talk about ways that you can take action now and not waiting through the legislative session, but actually right now, the things that we can do to help influence lawmakers. We're also going to be taking questions throughout this workshop. So if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A section. We're going to be happy to answer those and give you links to more information. And as a follow-up, after this workshop, we'll be sending an email to everyone participating with lots of links to resources to help you educate yourself on where we're at in Texas, where we want to go, and how we're going to get there together. So let's talk about some of our objectives and the different areas of policy when it comes to cannabis. Now, many of our coalition partners and now a majority of Texans want to see marijuana prohibition repealed entirely. We know that these policies have been an abject failure by every measure, and now we're able to have a meaningful conversation on these policies. We know that prohibition has caused far more harm than marijuana itself ever could. And that is exactly why the vast majority of Americans want to see these laws changed. And in Texas, according to the polling, we've just surpassed the 50% mark, meaning a majority of Texans see the merit of legalizing and regulating cannabis rather than prohibiting it, arresting responsible adults for consuming this substance that's objectively safer than alcohol, tobacco, and many of the pharmaceutical drugs that patients take every day. When we talk about legalization, we're talking about legalizing for those 21 and up. That is something that is overwhelmingly supported when it comes to the decision to be, should it be 18, should it be 21? We just saw Texas move to require a person to be 21 to even purchase cigarettes. That's the standard for alcohol, and that is generally what people support as well for cannabis. This is going to save lots of money, lots of taxpayer funds for the cost that it takes to have law enforcement officers arresting, prosecuting, the cost to prosecutors, the cost to the courts, and of course the systemic impact, the human cost that it has when it comes to people being saddled with criminal records, the traumatizing experience of having gone to jail, especially for someone who's never been before and is otherwise a peaceful person. It's a very traumatic experience, and the cost is just too high. When it comes to the economic benefit of legalizing, in addition to, of course, the social cost, and we talk about bringing in tax revenue. Our comptroller in Texas has estimated a budget shortfall of $4 billion as a result of the last year, the coronavirus, the impact it's had on our economy, the government lockdowns that have been put in place, and the effect that that has on tax revenue coming into the state. So they estimate a $4 billion shortfall. Well, a recent report by Vicente Sederberg, which is a consulting firm out of Colorado, has some Texans actually working for them that led the charge on their recent report on the economic benefit. And they estimate that it could bring in $1.1 billion per biennium. So we're talking about filling 25% of the budget shortfall simply by legalizing a product that Texans are already using. It's simply going unregulated and untaxed. As we've mentioned, marijuana is safer than alcohol, and possession should not be criminalized. We know that there are lots of better uses for our taxpayer dollars. And again, a majority of Texans want to see these policies changed. And we're seeing now lawmakers like never before talking about this issue. In large part, that's because of the economic situation that we're in. But legalization is on the table in a more meaningful way than ever before. So let's not miss this opportunity. Let's make sure that lawmakers understand the issue, that we overcome some of the common objections that people can have, most of which are based in misinformation that has been, spewed by prohibitionists. They like to skew the numbers. They like to say that the sky is falling. But we now have 15 states in the US that have legalized for adult use, defying the federal government and establishing a regulated retail market. This is a better approach, and I'm so grateful to see that this issue is finally on the table for discussion at the Capitol. Let's talk about some of the penalties that are in place for possession. Marijuana is spelled with an H in the statute. So if you're ever on the state website looking for bills, make sure you spell it the way that the state does. It's defined as any cannabis that has more than 0.3% THC. As we know, hemp has been legalized across the United States and in Texas, and anything with less than 0.3% THC is considered hemp and is legal across the board. But once you hit that point of 0.3%, it is now criminally illegal and carries significant consequences. Even a small amount can land someone in jail for up to 6 months. It can carry a lifetime of collateral consequences and can cost them up to $2,000 in fines. Of course, the penalties go up if you have more than that. And as you see here, between 2 and 4 ounces, it is a Class A misdemeanor, and you could be facing up to a year in jail. If 4 ounces or more is an automatic felony. And one thing that we have to talk about is that any amount of concentrate is a felony. These points that we're making here, as far as up to 2 ounces, the 2 to 4 ounces, that's for the flower. Concentrates are an automatic felony for any amount. A little bit of oil left in a vape pen, a cookie that you have that's infused with cannabis. And what's worse with concentrates is that oftentimes they charge you for the entire weight of the product. So you're getting charged for that cookie, you're getting charged for the sugar, the flour, the chocolate chips, rather than them identifying how much cannabis is in the product and only charging you for that amount. This is such an injustice, and we're going to talk in a little bit about the efforts that are in place to create a more reasonable way of assessing the penalties for these concentrated products. We saw more than 45,000 arrests in 2019. This was significantly down from years prior, where historically Texas has arrested between 60 and 70,000 people annually, with an estimated 2/3 of them ending up with a final conviction. And as we know, a conviction for a drug offense carries significant and lasting collateral consequences. which we'll talk about. So we see fines in place. I want to draw your attention actually to two columns before we get into this. One is what the current law is with the Class B misdemeanor. We have a column here for Class C misdemeanors. These are the proposals that have been put forward, and this is the way that that proposal would affect these penalties and collateral consequences. So there's a fine under both proposals, and a potential arrest under a Class C misdemeanor, but there is no jail time with a Class C. There is, like I mentioned before, up to 6 months in jail under current policies, a permanent criminal record. Your driver's license is suspended under current law automatically upon conviction. Your license to carry, your right to self-defense can be jeopardized for up to 7 years. You can have your financial aid jeopardized, your military service, naturalization if you're in the middle of the immigration process. Housing options are limited. Professional licensing, like becoming a nurse or a lawyer, can become jeopardized. And work visas can be denied under current policy. Now, in a bit, we're going to talk about the proposals that have been put forward, but I do want to draw your attention now to the Class C misdemeanor, which is a little bit better. As you see, there is no jail time associated with that. But there are lots of downsides because it is still a criminal offense. And so let's talk a little bit about what our objectives are for having that kind of policy in place. But first, let's talk about local enforcement. We've heard a lot about cite and release, diversion programs that have been implemented, and this has established a patchwork of policies throughout the state of Texas. Different areas have different penalties, and this is exactly why we continue to work for a statewide policy. Austin has done the most recently, and it's the most far-reaching proposal. They're no longer arresting people for low-level possession of concentrates or flower. This is because the DA is not moving forward with these cases. It's too expensive to have to test these products to determine whether they're hemp or whether they're marijuana. Is it legal cannabis or is it illegal cannabis? It's very costly, and a lot of district attorneys, many had already been implementing diversion programs, but having hemp legalized and the cost of enforcement was just too high. And so we've seen every major metro area move forward with a diversion program and or a cite and summons policy. Now, I do want to mention cite and release, cite and summons. It's the same general concept, but cite and summons is more accurate because you're not just cited and released. You are cited and you receive a summons to go to court where you still face all of the same penalties that are on the books, the 6 months in jail, the $2,000 in fines, and the lifetime permanent criminal record. So we've seen these policies become enacted, but of course they don't go far enough. We're still seeing tens of thousands of people arrested and saddled with criminal records. Now, since we have seen a reduction in arrests, that's a good thing, but it is important to note that there has been disparity in enforcement. We've seen this over the decades of the drug war, the marijuana prohibition, but now even with these policies that are trying to mitigate harm, we still see in San Antonio, for example, they're still arresting 65% of the people they come into contact with marijuana possession. And really alarming, in Dallas, 90% of those arrested were Black or Hispanic. We're continuing to see racial disparity in enforcement, and it's unacceptable. This is why, again, we need to have a statewide policy changed. Getting involved locally is incredibly important. That's the only way that these have been enacted, is by activists getting involved, building relationships with local law enforcement, their prosecutors, their city councils, county commissioners. Local politics is so incredibly important, and earning their support, not only does it help to get local policies changed in the way that we enforce these laws, but those folks also can become advocates. So build a relationship with your city council members, your county commissioners, and if they're supportive, ask them to contact the state legislature in that area. It's really important that they hear from local officials. That kind of advocacy can go a long way. We also know that statewide leaders have had a change in heart over the years. We've seen advocacy really have a meaningful impact. Here we see the quote from our governor, Greg Abbott, who said this on live TV during a debate during the last campaign, that he doesn't want to see our jails stockpiled with people with possession of low-level marijuana. Just doesn't make sense. And we were able to earn the governor's support on policies last session. Looking forward to continuing that conversation and getting legislation passed this upcoming legislative session with his support. So what are our objectives when it comes to penalty reduction? So obviously repealing prohibition entirely would be ideal. Whether or not we're able to do that, we have to move forward with penalty reduction. There are so many lives being impacted, and a simple change to the law can do so much good and make such a big impact. So we'd like to see it punishable by a fine only, no jail, no arrest for low-level marijuana possession. The offense should not generate a criminal record. We want to have an opportunity for a person to avoid a criminal record. Class C misdemeanors, like we mentioned earlier, are criminal and do carry a criminal record if you are convicted. And so making sure we're working with lawmakers that have introduced these kinds of proposals so that we can get provisions in the bill that allow people to take a drug education course or do community service and have the case dismissed, helping them to avoid that lifetime of collateral consequences. There are 27 states plus Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, that have reduced penalties for low-level possession, basically decriminalizing it. This is an approach that Texas should take immediately as we continue the conversation about what marijuana policy looks like in the future. Shifting gears into medical cannabis. Here's an overview of the program, and then we'll talk about our objectives. I do want to take a moment to note that all of these resources are going to be made available to you. We'll have this slideshow presentation available in PDF form. And again, we're sending a follow-up email with a ton of links to resources on these different policies, on the process at the Capitol, and how you can get more involved with your legislature. So as you probably know, Texas has in place the compassionate use program. It was enacted in 2015 for only those with intractable epilepsy, and it only allows access for low THC cannabis. Luckily, this program was expanded in 2019 to include more qualifying conditions, and it made some improvements to the program, but unfortunately, it's still unreasonably restrictive. It still has a cap of 0.5% THC for these products. Doctors should be making the decision on dosing, not lawmakers. We want to see this cap removed, allowing doctors to practice medicine and allowing patients access to the type of medicine that is going to work best for their biochemistry and for their condition. Patients have access if they have a qualifying condition like any seizure disorder, not just intractable epilepsy, but any seizure disorder, multiple sclerosis. Spasticity is a symptom of many different conditions, and it is a qualifier for this program. Terminal cancers included, incurable neurodegenerative disorders. Many of these are very rare as defined by the Department of State Health Services, but Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and Huntington's disease are included as qualifying conditions. Autism and ALS also qualify under the current program as expanded in 2019. There are 3 dispensaries that have been licensed to operate in the state of Texas. Only 2 of them are actually operational at this point, and they're able to deliver medicine, but they're not able to have multiple locations throughout the state. So there are only really 2 brick and mortar dispensaries in the state of Texas at this time. Physicians are participating maybe more than some of us expected, considering the risk that they take to prescribe cannabis. But we have seen about 250 doctors register to participate in this program. Unfortunately, they aren't all available online. There isn't a full list of all the doctors that have registered, but some are listed on the DPS website. This program is regulated by the Texas Department of Public Safety. They're the ones who issue licenses for businesses and manage the Compassionate Use Registry of Texas. Physicians who are participating need to be specialists in the area that they're prescribing or that they're recommending cannabis for. And when it comes to the business side of things, again, DPS is regulating. We have 3 businesses licensed. They have issued rules and regulations that are mostly reasonable. They seem to go above and beyond, which I think is important at the beginning to make sure that things are regulated well and that there's confidence in the program. But we have to make sure that we're being reasonable with this market. We're talking about cannabis, a substance that's never killed a single human in the course of history, and we regulate it so greatly that it costs so much that this program really isn't viable for businesses. $488,000 is what it takes to have a license for the first 2 years for the most restrictive medical cannabis program in the country. Plus, every 2 years after that, it's just over $300,000 to renew your license. Of course, that's in addition to registering all of your directors and your employees. So the cost adds up quickly, creating a tremendous barrier to entry and a barrier to being able to be profitable. We want these companies to operate well. I'm all for businesses and people providing for their families, entrepreneurs. We have to make sure that this program is regulated reasonably. So some of the changes that we want to see overall, we want to see this program made more inclusive. Doctors should be the ones deciding which patients have access to this medicine, and they should be able to decide on dosing rather than having this 0.5% THC cap, which means the cannabis is basically the same as what you can get over the counter at 0.3%. If Texas isn't willing to allow doctors to decide which patients have access to this medicine, at minimum, we should be on par with the other 36 states across the country that allow safe and legal access to this medicine for those with a long list of debilitating medical conditions. In fact, every state surrounding Texas has a medical cannabis program that's better than our state. It's something that we have to change. Southern states are already making this shift, and Texas is so woefully behind, and people's lives are being impacted negatively because of it. Some of the other ways that we can improve the compassionate use program is establishing patient protections, making sure that people don't lose their jobs because they're using cannabis legally under the compassionate use program, making sure that they still qualify for jobs that require professional licensing. Parental protections are so critically important to medical cannabis. No child should be removed from their home because either they or their parent need medical cannabis and are using it legally. We need to authorize independent labs in the state of Texas. This is a good way to make sure that we don't need over-regulation, that we have, of course, reasonable regulations in place, but that we can hold the industry to a higher standard with independent testing and consumer reports so that consumers know exactly what's in their medicine and we can hold the industry accountable in that way. Of course, I have confidence in the businesses that are operating now, but we do need to think about this from a public policy standpoint. And as we move forward with not only medical now, but adult use down the line, if Texas decides to go in that direction, we're going to need products that are tested, that are labeled, and that consumers can have confidence in. One final note that I want to make as far as improving the program. I mentioned earlier the risk that doctors are taking, and that's because it's illegal to prescribe a Schedule I substance. And cannabis at 0.5% THC is still a controlled substance. The way that doctors work around this or are able to operate in other states, the 36 states that are legal, is that they recommend cannabis and they certify patients. It's all a formal process, but it's not technically a prescription that could jeopardize their registration with the DEA and their livelihoods, their ability to prescribe scheduled substances to all of their patients. This is a minor tweak in the law that would go a long way to giving doctors the confidence they need to participate in this program. We know that overwhelmingly Texans are in favor of reform. 86%, according to recent polls, are in favor of medical, at least certainly decriminalization. And what we see is that a small minority of Texans are clinging to prohibition. 14%, only 14% of Texans want to see these laws the same. We have work to do in the state of Texas and making sure that lawmakers are hearing the voices of the people that want to see these laws changed. They're receiving messages that are effective so that advocates are making these compelling arguments that they really can't say no to. And one thing that we found is that when you sit down for a conversation with a lawmaker and their staff, it's very difficult for them to defend the status quo when they've had advocates talking to them about the merit of reform. And that's where you come in. That's where we all come in throughout the state of Texas, is making sure that we are taking action throughout the legislative process. So with that, I am pleased to introduce my friend and colleague, Jax Finkel. She is the Executive Director of Texas Normal, one of our most active and engaged allies. She's going to talk us through how a bill becomes a law and how we participate in that process. So take it away, Jax.
Thank you, Heather, and I appreciate everyone joining us today. It is the first day of the 87th legislature, and we have a lot of work to do. If you guys have been following along, you know that in Texas, we are reliant on our Texas state representatives and our Texas state senators. The reason is that we don't have a typical ballot initiative. We're one of about 20 states that don't have the ability to collect signatures to put something on the ballot for the people to vote on. So what I'm going to talk about today is how the legislature works. They meet for every 2 years for 140 days. Sometimes there can be a special session after that, but in general, that's how much time they spend up at the Capitol. And of course, today was the big first day where they were signed in and start moving forward with the procedures to get ready to really get to work. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you guys and show you this great little infographic is what I'll call it, that kind of shows us how a bill becomes a law. So let me preface this by saying a bill can start this process in the House or in the Senate. It just has to wind its way all the way through both chambers. But if at any point a bill does not move forward, it's dead. There are ways to revive bills up to a certain point, but once they are dead, you don't see them again. Next session, they would have a new number if they were refiled. So let's start with a basic bill starting in the House. The House has 150 members, so there's a lot more members to help vet these bills, whereas on the Senate, there's 31 senators, so they have a lot more work to do. Typically, the House kind of vets these bills and then sends it over to the Senate to find consensus. So starting in the House, we have a representative who authors a bill. They introduced that legislation as early as 60 days prior to session. So that's how we already have over 24 cannabis bills because they have been pre-filed. Now today, everyone was sworn in, but sometime around the end of January, beginning of February, we'll start seeing committee chairs being assigned, and that will be the committees that vet each of these different bills based on topic. So for example, bills on medical cannabis are going to the Public Health Committee, right? Bills that have to do with decriminalization will probably go to criminal jurisprudence committees. So the committee chair really helps decide what bills are going to move forward. Now, typically we see a lot of bills getting a lot of hearings. It's the hustle and bustle up at the Capitol, but with COVID being around, we do expect that there will be a limitation to a certain extent as to what bills actually go to hearing. So the chair themselves, they set the schedule. They say, okay, we're now going to take this, in this case, let's say a medical cannabis bill, and we're going to schedule it for a hearing. So the committee hearing that day will accept testimony that will probably look a lot different than it has in the past. Typically, you sign up, you wait your turn, and you get to have your 3 minutes to speak your piece with the legislators, but it may look different this year. And then a lot of people are under the impression that at the end of the hearing, there's a vote on the bill, and that is not the case. Typically, committees meet every week to vote on a slate of bills. So, okay, last week we talked about all these bills. Which ones are we going to move forward? So let's say our bill makes it out of committee. Then it would go to a committee that's called the Calendar Committee. It's like the gatekeeper of the House floor. And this is the only committee that doesn't have their votes registered. So for example, in the committee hearing, we will know exactly how each of those committee members voted on the bill. But in the Calendars Committee, it's a simple up or down vote on the bill. And we don't know who voted which way. But a majority vote is needed from the Calendars Committee members for this bill to make it to the House floor. Once it makes it to the House floor, it has a couple little steps that it has to make its way through. There's several readings, there's opportunity to debate and amend the bill, and then ultimately vote on the bill. Now you need a majority to pass out of the House into the Senate, and it moves along in a fairly similar manner. So now we have our bill over to the Senate. In this case, the lieutenant governor will assign bills to whichever committee they are most appropriate for. And at that point, that committee chair can also schedule that hearing. They do a thing called tagging, where they say if they like the bill, they don't like the bill. They'll allow for public hearing. That'll be our opportunity to let the senators know what we think about it. And then they will debate and amend it. Ultimately, they'll vote on it, and then it will move forward to enrollment. Once it's been fully enrolled, which is a very administrative process, it goes to the governor's desk. And the governor has three options that he can choose to do. He can choose to veto a bill, which can be overcome by a supermajority, but typically he holds vetoes till the end, so there's not really the opportunity to go through that process. He can also choose to sign the bill, hold a signing ceremony like he did with the medical cannabis program, and it's a nice little pomp and circumstance ceremony, or he can simply ignore the bill into law. And that means that at the date that is in the bill, that is when it will become a law and it will be statute. So it's a little bit of sometimes a complicated and confusing process. And of course, there's lots of little steps in between, but that is the broad overview. Of course, I'll have some links in the document that Heather was talking about. And what we're going to talk about next is we're going to pivot to having a short tutorial on how to find out who your legislators are. We're also going to talk about how to meet with your legislators. So let's turn it over to that.
Today, we'll learn how to find out who represents you in the Texas House and Senate. Included with this video will be the links needed to find out who your representative and senator are. Please keep in mind that this demonstration is being done on a computer and will be slightly different in appearance if done on a mobile device. Using a laptop or desktop will yield the best functionality. First, we'll go to the Who Represents Me page on the state website. From here, fill out your street address, city, and zip code. Keep in mind to use your physical home address, as a P.O. box may not be in the same district. For this demonstration, we'll use the address for the Texas Capitol in Austin. You'll put in your street address, city, and zip code, then click Find. After you click Find, it will bring up this page, which shows you your state and federal elected officials. In this example, we're looking for the representative for Texas House, which is Representative Hinojosa. Now that we know which representative we're looking for, we'll go over to the House Members page. The representatives are listed in alphabetical order by last name, so we'll scroll down here to find your representative using their last name and then click on their page link. This will bring you to your representatives page. Here there is an abundance of information such as their email, capital address, phone number, and other pertinent information. This is the information you need to write an email, mail a letter, and call their office. While emails are great, writing a physical letter or calling their office will better ensure your concerns are heard. Now, let's go back to the Who Represents Me page and find your senator, which in this demonstration would be Senator Sarah Eckert in Senate District 14. Now we'll go over to the Senate Members page. The senators are listed in numerical order by district, so we'll scroll down here to find our senator and then click on their page link. The layout is different from the House Members page, but all of the same information is here, including email, address, and phone number. Again, emails are great, but physical letters and phone calls are better. That's all it takes to find out who represents you in the Texas legislature and how to contact them. Be sure to check out the video description for helpful information about contacting your legislators.
Hi everyone, Happy New Year. Hope you're all doing well. I'm sorry that we can't be together for this policy conference, but we appreciate you being online and being active and getting prepared for the upcoming 87th Texas legislature. Today in this tutorial, we're going to focus on how to schedule an office visit and then effectively communicate our policy goals to members of the legislature. In the previous tutorial, you learned how to use the Capitol website to identify your representatives and senators, how to find their office contact information and location, as well as how to find what bills they have supported in the past through record votes, or also what legislation they may have filed directly. I think it's important for us all to try to familiarize ourselves as much as we can with our representatives, looking for areas where we might have common ground, and then that way we can look to build rapport over this session and future sessions. Once you've identified your representatives, you can start contacting their offices by phone, email, or in-person office visits. I would suggest creating a log, maybe through a spreadsheet or some other means, where you can track your attempts to connect with that office, what the results of your visits may have been, and then also tracking their support for legislation that has passed in previous sessions or that may be up for a vote for this session. Knowing all of this data and being able to refer to it is going to create better metrics for us to create targeted information and targeting messages to these particular offices based on their concerns. As well as we continue to meet with more and more offices, we'll probably see similar questions and concerns from those members, and having this data set to refer back to again will help us develop those rebuttals where we can really strongly position our policy goals and craft our message to address all of their concerns. During the legislative session, you're much more likely to meet with your member or their staff in the Capitol building, as opposed to out of session when you're more likely to meet somewhere in the district, which is generally there in your local community. So meeting at the Capitol this session, we're obviously going to face challenges with the COVID restrictions. It's a little bit uncertain now, as it seems the rules, regulations, and obviously the rumors are changing on a daily basis. So we'll continue to monitor the situation over the next couple of weeks. We'll see how things are going as the Capitol building opens up, as the legislature starts to convene, and we'll see where we are as we get towards committee hearings, how public testimony will look, how many citizens will be allowed into the building, and then how we coordinate scheduling office visits from there. So regardless, it's very important that we respect the health concerns of the members and their offices. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of stigmatization and potential anxiety around COVID in the Capitol building. So when we get our opportunities for meetings, we want to make sure that we're respecting the offices. I've heard that many of the staff members will be working from home. This is going to create potentially a bottleneck of limited number of staff in the office who have many things to do, as well as can taking the walk-in constituents or even most likely scheduled constituent meetings. So we want to make sure that we are having these meetings, we are pushing our agenda and our messages forward, but also understanding that we want to get in and get out as respectfully and efficiently as possible. If your representative sits on the Public Health or Criminal Jurisprudence Committee in the House, or the Criminal Justice or Health and Human Services Committee in the Senate, they're more likely going to have an active role in helping us push this legislation across the finish line. So we want to know who those individuals are, who those constituents are, and making sure that we're turning out most effectively, especially in the Senate, to get those members to push on the Lieutenant Governor, if this bill comes across from the House again, to allow for a committee vote this time. Hopefully you've done your research on your representative and their policy positions, whether that's through researching the Capitol website, looking at their social media posts, their campaign website, as well as other news articles that you may have seen referencing their talking points on various issues. So, where we can identify their support for our cannabis legislation, we want to target that. And then also in other areas where you may have some opportunity to build rapport through, commonly held beliefs. I think that's important to reference. I agree with you. Thank you for filing this bill on something totally unrelated to cannabis. That helps them know that you are following their activity in the legislature. Thankfully for us, a record has been developed through the initial passage of TCUP, as well as the expansion, and then through the passage of the penalty reduction bill, HB 63, last session. We have a good idea of where many of the members stand on these issues. Unfortunately, in the Senate, we weren't able to get a vote on penalty reduction, so we don't necessarily know where those senators stand. I think it's very important for us to encourage all of the senators as constituents of theirs to push the members of the Criminal Justice Committee, as well as Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, to allow for a committee hearing, a committee vote, and then a floor vote on the penalty reduction bill, assuming that it passes the House as strongly as it did last session. When you first call the Capitol office or district office, you should ask to speak to the scheduler. Tell them that you'd like to schedule an in-person visit or a phone call with the legislative member or someone on their staff who handles the criminal justice or public health type issues, depending on what specific topic you're calling about. It's also important to remember that the staff plays a very important role in these legislative offices. So don't get concerned or discouraged if you're asked to meet with staff instead of the member, especially this year with everything being so different. The staff takes meticulous notes and details for the rest of their colleagues in the office, but as well as their reports to the member. Anything that comes in by phone, email, office visit with a constituent registering support for or against any issue is going to be documented and accessible. So if this bill comes up for a vote on the floor, they can call back to the office and say, what's our total for against from our constituents? And they can find that information very easily. Sometimes you may even be asked to meet out in the hallway. So again, don't feel offended. It may be because of distancing rules or just other things that are going on in that office on that day. So just again, don't get disgruntled, don't get frustrated. Present your message as clearly as possible. If you have documentation that you want to give to the offices, make sure that that's organized effectively and that it has your contact information so they can easily contact you with any follow-up questions. During your meeting, you should be polite, professional, and patient. Make sure to arrive early, dress professionally. Think of it similar maybe to going to a job interview, and then conduct yourself. Remember that even though these meetings may get tense or frustration may be building, the worst thing that you can do is have a negative reaction, using vulgarity, profanity, or something like that, which not only affects their perception of you as an individual and as a constituent, but also you're a representative of our broader coalition. And we don't want a negative consequence or a negative experience to create a closed door where one may have remained open with better messaging and communication on our part. It's important to take seriously and listen to all objections or concerns that are raised by the members of their staff. And remember, everybody has a different frame of reference, a different perspective. So they may have some issues in their life or with their family members that have caused them to see this issue differently. And it's okay that they disagree, with you or your position. But what we want to understand is why. Why do they hold those positions? And then is there any information where we can provide to show that a change in the law would make that situation different? But most of all, we want to be respectful. We want to be courteous, accept their views. We can't accept that they'll just totally agree with everything that we say without having to listen to, their opinions and their concerns on the issue as well. So be respectful, be courteous, and try to continue to develop strong, positive relationships with these members over this session so that we can carry those into the off season and then into the next legislative sessions as well. I'm excited to see what we can accomplish this session. Certainly it's going to be difficult because of the unique challenges we face as a state with managing the budget, redistricting, the COVID things going on, and all of the other concerns and priorities for the legislative members. I am confident that this is a policy that's supported by a majority of Texans, both on expanding our medical access program and penalty reduction for possession of small amounts of cannabis. So there's never been a better time than now for us to get active, start meeting with these representatives, contacting their offices, being a constant and consistent voice in their ear on implementing smart cannabis policy. I wish you all the best of luck. Now, Lisa Sewell is going to guide us through crafting testimony and really talking about how we can take our personal stories, our personal experiences, and present those to these offices to hopefully allow them to see these issues in a new light and let them think about things from a different perspective as well. So with that, I thank you all. I hope you all have a great year, a great session. I wish us all the best of the luck, and hopefully we're able to join together, sometime this year or, in the future as well to continue hitting the Capitol and pushing and promoting our goals. So thanks again, everyone, and best of luck. Take care. Bye.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Sewell, and I am here today to talk to you about drafting your testimonial. As you know, we are not a ballot initiative state, and we rely on our legislators to change the laws on our behalf. And so with the COVID restrictions in place, we see a lot of changes happening at the Capitol as far as accessibility to our representatives. And so we want to encourage everyone and everyone to write a written testimonial or submit a video testimonial to your representatives. So we want to work with you to help you make that happen. If you can, submit your testimonial to, there's a comment section below here that you can place, there's a link, click on that link and you can enter your testimonial information directly. And there are a group of volunteers that are helping edit them, get them ready, and get them back to you for final approval ahead of session. So there's also in the comment link, before I go into this, I have provided my own sample video testimonial that I gave to my senator, as well as my written testimonial. So you can use those as an example, however you see fit, to help draft yours. So that being said, I want you to keep in mind your story matters, and it will help change the hearts and minds of our reps this session. So please do take the time to do this. One of the things that I keep in mind when I start my testimonials is I need to keep it to one page. Anything over a page is too much information and we don't want it to get lost in translation. The first paragraph, I would start off with a brief personal introduction of who you are, where you live, what your personal background is, and professional if it's applicable. The second paragraph, I would say tell your story. This is the meat of your testimony. Your story is unique, and it helps to, if you keep it very, your conversation's relevant. Legislators will remember it better. Third paragraph, I would say explain how this law impacts you on your day-to-day life or the ones that you love. And this is a great opportunity to explain to them what it's done for you and your loved ones. The fourth paragraph, I would ask for specific action. I would, such as supporting a bill or a certain action like increasing the cap on THC, adding additional elements, or allowing the doctors to decide, or decriminalization. Whatever your testimonial is about, ask them for a specific request. And then the final statement, I would thank them for their time. It's very important for them to know how much they're appreciated this session. It's going to be an odd one, and so that is definitely something I recommend doing. And then sign off with your name, the city, and any contact information that you're willing to give. You don't have to include your address, but I recommend it just so your representatives can verify that you're in their district. A few things to note too, if you need to use medical terms or specific name for an illness, do briefly describe what it means so that those seeing your testimony can understand your story better. Stay away from making claims about anything or anyone but yourself. If you must, then cite their sentence. Read over your testimony a few times to make sure that there's no grammatical errors and it's getting across the point that you're really trying to make to them. And then rehearse it. It's okay to rehearse it over and over. That's definitely something that I do before I submit mine, and so I think it's a good idea. Stay on the subject. The subject is marijuana, unjust laws, the victims of unjust laws, and how marijuana heals us. And then lastly, please don't use any profanity. Just keep it as professional as possible. We all know that we're very passionate about this topic. We know how important it is to you and your families. And so we just want to keep that professionalism so we can build these relationships. Now, like I said, you can find those links of where to find a sample video and written testimonial in the link below and where to submit yours. Now, as far as recording goes, what I would do is just take that testimonial you just wrote down and practice it and try to get it down to 90 seconds. Anything over 90 seconds, keep in mind how many people are going to be submitting their videos this year. And we don't want to bog the representatives' time down with continuing to put 5-minute videos in front of them. So if you can, you may even have to break down your written testimonial a little bit to fit, but you can do it. Practice what you're going to say before reading it. This allows you time to yourself to ensure that you don't degrade anyone. Keep your testimonial positive. Record in a quiet location. So for as I come up here in my office and close the door and turn off all the phones, so that way there's really good sound. If you're recording with a phone, big tip, turn it sideways so that it records horizontally instead of vertically to ensure the best results. So that being said, I hope this information helps you. Good luck to all of you this legislative session. We're very excited to see what kind of changes we can make together. So good luck.
Okay, so while the legislative session began today, marking the beginning of a 140-day period, there was a pre-filing period. Legislators have been able to introduce bills since the beginning of November, just after the election, and we've already seen nearly 24 cannabis-related bills introduced. So we have them all listed on our website. They're on texasmarijuanapolicy.org and also texasnormal.org. And we have all the bills listed with a brief description of what they do. I want to highlight just a few. And before we get into that, I do want to note that we have some action that you can take here. If you want to contact your legislator in support of decriminalization, medical cannabis, or legalization, you can follow these links to send automatic letters to your legislators. Please feel free to also save those links so that you can share them with others. When a news article gets posted on social media, for example, in the comments, you can activate those that are reading that story to get them to take action and contact their legislators. So you can become a force multiplier once you've sent your letters, then helping others to do the same. So let's talk about a few of these bills. We're so grateful to see both Democrats and Republicans prioritizing this legislation, really demonstrating how much broad support it has, and doing so really early in the process. So we'll start with House Bill 99. This was the first cannabis-related bill that was introduced this session. It was by Representative Steve Toth. He's a conservative from a very conservative area of the state, but he understands that current policies are failing, and we're so grateful for his leadership on this bill to reduce penalties for low-level possession. His bill would eliminate the threat of arrest, which is great. He writes into the law that even though it's a Class C misdemeanor, that there is no opportunity to be arrested. And that is really important because everything in Texas is arrestable, with the exception of three things: driving while texting and driving, open container, and speeding. Those are the only things that you can't be arrested for, and it's because it's written into the statute. Representative Toth is doing that with his legislation here, writing in that it's a Class C misdemeanor with a fine of $500, but no arrest. We're working with him now, and we've talked about including a provision that would allow a person to take a drug education course or do community service to avoid a conviction. And he is supportive of that. So I do expect this legislation to really get better as it moves forward through the legislative process. There are a couple others I want to highlight. One of the bills that made it through the legislative session, made it through the House, let me be more specific, last legislative session, was a bill that was championed by Representative Moody. Well, as we'll talk about in a moment, Representative Moody has moved on to carry other legislation, and he has passed the torch to Representative Erin Zwiener. She is carrying a bill that would make it a simple fine. It would be a Class C misdemeanor, but there is already written into the legislation an opportunity to have the case dismissed. And when your case is dismissed, the court has to inform you on how to get the arrest record or the record of any proceedings expunged, so that you have no scar on your record for this having happened. Really grateful for her leadership. That's House Bill 441. There are a couple other decriminalization bills that I want to draw your attention to. Obviously, there are a lot, ranging from Representative Dutton's bill that only decriminalizes 2 ounces, to other legislation that attacks the war on drugs more broadly for all drug possession, low-level drug possession. But I want to draw your attention to a couple bills that are really important relating to concentrates. So we have Representative Canales has House Bill 439. This bill, and then companion to that is Senator Johnson's bill, right here, Senate Bill 151. Now, what this legislation does is it brings down the penalty. So it's not going to be a felony for a small amount of concentrates. It's absurd that it is right now, especially because concentrated products, whether it's an oil or an infused product, is a safer way to consume cannabis. But we're penalizing people much harsher than we need to. So these 2 bills would bring the penalty down for low-level possession of concentrates into misdemeanor range. So it's no longer a felony. And maybe even more importantly, though, it requires truth in assessment. It requires law enforcement to test the product and only charge you for the amount of cannabis or the amount of THC that's actually in it. This is a much more fair way to assess these penalties. So those are a few of the decriminalization bills that are high on our list. Of course, we're watching and paying attention to all of these as well. When it comes to medical cannabis, Senator Menendez has been a champion for several legislative sessions, and we are so grateful for his continued leadership and the passion with which he leads on this issue. Senate Bill 90 is a bill that would make the compassionate use program more inclusive, not only allowing doctors to have more leeway when it comes to dosing, but also a more robust list of qualifying conditions. It includes patient protections, independent testing, all of the points that we want to see in a bill like this. So a big thank you to Senator Menendez. If you're in his district, please send him a note of gratitude to make sure that he feels well supported in this effort. In the House, we have House Bill 43 by Representative Alex Dominguez. He is among several legislators that have introduced medical cannabis bills, and his bill is very similar to Senator Menendez. It does a lot of what we want it to do as far as making the program more inclusive and fixing some of the problems that we've seen with this program. There are two other medical bills that I want to draw your attention to. We have House Bill 567 by Representative James Frank and Senate Bill 190 by Representative Brian Hughes. These bills are very narrow in scope, but it is worth noting that these bills would protect parental rights for those participating in the compassionate use program. We want to make sure, again, like I mentioned before, that no child is removed from a home because they or their parents need access to this medicine. So very grateful for the two of them for introducing those pieces of legislation. Of course, we hope that something more broad passes to make the compassionate use program more inclusive and to protect parental rights. Shifting gears to adult use legalization, I think the biggest bill to watch is being led by Representative Joe Moody. He's a former prosecutor from El Paso. Most of us know him because he has been a champion of reform for the last several legislative sessions. Having seen firsthand how these laws are affecting people's lives when he was serving in the district attorney's office as a prosecutor, knowing the cost and the resources that go into these prosecutions, he knows that it just doesn't make sense. There's better ways to utilize our resources. And that's why he was championing decriminalization for so long. Having passed the baton to Representative Zwiener, we now have him as a champion on adult use legalization, repealing prohibition entirely, replacing it with a system of regulation. This bill would legalize for adults 21 and up. Of course, we're talking about responsible adult use. You have to keep it away from kids and you can't drive while you're impaired. Of course, those are reasonable restrictions in place. For a lot of people, being able to grow their own cannabis is incredibly important, especially those who are sick and need access to medicine. Of course, here we're talking about adult use, but with some of the implications of being on a registry while the federal government continues to prohibit marijuana, keeping it as a controlled substance. There are lots of people that choose to participate in a legal market rather than the medical market. And so growing your own is something that's important. And his bill would allow an adult in a secure, confined space to be able to grow up to 12 plants of their own. We're so grateful for Representative Moody's leadership. We also see two bills in the Senate, Senate Bill 140, and just recently introduced has Senate Bill 269 by Senator West. Both of those bills would legalize adult use in the state of Texas. There are a few other bills that I'll just note quickly, one relating to hemp. If you buy something that you think is hemp at 0.3% or less THC, and it turns out that it tests positive a little bit higher than that, this bill by Representative or Chairwoman Collier would give you an affirmative defense to prosecution. Before we talk about constitutional amendments with Jack's up next, I do want to mention a couple other cannabis related bills, things to keep an eye on. House Bill 413 by Representative King would require drug testing for the temporary assistance for needy families. So we're talking about food help for those who are food insecure, helping children receive the food that they need when their parents are poor or can't afford it. We are seeing a proposal here that gets introduced often, never really goes anywhere, mostly because I think it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. But that's for another day to be argued. But this legislation would require drug tests for those assistance programs. House Bill 859 by Representative Collier, again, this would expunge records for any offenses that have since been decriminalized. So, and that's misdemeanors. So if you're convicted of a misdemeanor and in the past, and now it's been decriminalized, this is a process by which you can have that arrest expunged. We really appreciate her leadership on that. These expungements really should be automatic. If a person is accused of a crime and they are found not guilty or the case is dismissed, they shouldn't be harmed by an arrest record for an offense that they were not guilty of. This is a bigger picture problem that we have in the criminal justice system, that really significant effect on even an arrest record that you weren't convicted for can have on your life, and the cost that takes to actually get that record expunged. Thankfully, there are resources available for getting your record expunged or having a conviction sealed. And actually, we talked about that at our recent marijuana policy conference. Kyle Holscher talked through the process for having a record expunged. He also works with the Foundation for an Informed Texas, who recently hosted something with that information as well. So with that, I will kick it back over to Jax to talk about these constitutional amendments. What are they? Are they feasible? Do they make sense? And should we be advocating for them?
Thank you, Heather. Yes, joint resolutions are a little bit different than our regular bills because they actually amend our Constitution. I'm going to share with you guys a little slide about the definition of a joint resolution. So basically, since it changes our Constitution, it has a much higher barrier to pass and a longer time for it to be implemented. So much like a bill, it's authored by a legislator, excuse me, and it has to pass out of both chambers with a supermajority. Once that happens, it actually bypasses the governor and goes straight to the Secretary of State. They will then put it on either the election that is written into the legislation or whichever the next election is. At that point in time, there will be, I'm sure, quite a bit of advertisement from law enforcement and others who are for and against this type of change to our Constitution. And then it would be up to the voters to decide and see if it passes. Assuming that it does pass, that would then come back to the legislator in the next session, and they would build out the statutes surrounding that policy. Then that would go through the regulatory process and be implemented, and then we would be able to have access to whichever option the joint resolution addresses. So this is a much higher barrier to pass because you have to have a supermajority, and it can take several years to go through the whole process. So while the joint resolutions are something that people have definitely talked about doing, since there is this higher barrier to passing, it can be more difficult. But I did want to let everybody know that at this time, there are several joint resolutions, 2 in the House and 2 in the Senate. There's HJR 13 from Canales, which is a legalization resolution. And then there's HJR 28 from Larson, a conservative legislator on medical cannabis. And then in the Senate, Eckhart has authored SJR 16 on legalization, and Reynolds has authored HJR 11 on medical. So we have some options for these. Definitely track them. We will keep them up on our website so you can find out what happens with them. But as I mentioned, a bill is typically an easier shot to go at than a joint resolution. So now I want to talk a little bit about the COVID restrictions at the Capitol. First, I want to let everybody know that there are several different entities that will be offering guidelines for the Capitol. First, there's the State Preservation Board. They oversee generally the whole Capitol, all of the public areas. Then you'll have the House, which will create the guidelines for their chambers and their offices. And then you have the Senate, which will make their own guidelines as well on what they want to see. So there may be several different sets of protocols and guidelines that are going around. So we will have some links to their most recent protocols that they put out. As for the House, they have some work to do to get those in place. The Senate has put a few things in place for the very beginning of session. But in general, this is from the State Preservation Board. they're saying that the Capitol will be open to the public just Monday through Friday and only 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Now, generally during the session, it is open all day long because there's lots of hearings and work and busy things going on, but they are going to be restricting the hours. We have seen them open and then close the Capitol. So once again, all of these things could change in a moment. So you have to stay tuned, but this is where we're at right now. Some of the things that the State Preservation Board is saying is that the public can only enter via the North Capitol entrance. It is handicap and wheelchair accessible, so that is extremely important. COVID-19 testing is recommended, and you can get it in the North Plaza at no expense. DPS will be doing those. I believe that last I heard they can do about 12 an hour, and they are saying that no personal data will be collected. At this time, there is a mask mandate, and they are requiring that it cover both your nose and mouth at all times while you're inside the building. Public visitor capacity limits will be observed. Social distancing will also be observed. So they'll likely have some more information on the numbers of how many people are going to be allowed in the Capitol at any time. Also, any deliveries that are being made to offices have to be left on the loading dock. So no outside delivery personnel will be allowed. Additionally, there will be no public tours. There will be no groups. There will be no sponsored event spaces available. So all of those are not going to be happening. The House and the Senate will be managing access to their own offices. So it's extremely important as you get closer, if you're deciding you want to go to the Capitol, call the legislator that you're wanting to visit and make sure you know what protocol you need to get into their office, as it might be different than the protocol that you need to get into the building. I know it can be a little confusing, guys, but this is where we're at right now. So talking about some of the generic restrictions that we're seeing, likely to have temperature checks and symptom checks at all of the entrances, or just the north entrance if they continue to keep just one entrance open. There will be plexiglass dividers, not only between everyone on the dais, but also for desk mates on the floor of both the House and the Senate. In general, staff will not be allowed on the dais, although there was a caveat in the Senate for allowing some staffers up there, but they will be regularly tested. They also They also anticipate that they will have to limit the number of witnesses that are giving testimony at any time. I know that this can feel a little bit maybe scary, the fact that they might be able to restrict that, but it is important that we distance. I'm hopeful that they will have a virtual testimony option, although we're not sure exactly what that might look like. The auditorium, which is where we held our lobby day last session, is not going to be available for reservation. And the reason is that they're going to be using the auditoriums and the meetings rooms as overflow for witnesses that are in the building. So that does mean it will be a little bit harder for us to, typically we get a meeting room and everybody meets and we wait for our bill to come up and then we go in, and it's going to look very different from that. They are also limiting, as I mentioned earlier, the number of bills that will be assigned to committee. Sometimes bills are assigned to committee or given a hearing as kind of a favor, but these are just going to be high priority bills that are going to be focused on first. Also, food services will be restricted. I think that they're going to have a whole probably protocol on that. There is a document from the House that has a lot of considerations that the representatives need to consider. You'll find that in our quick link document as well. They're also limiting access to each chamber. We're not sure if the public will even be allowed in the gallery. At this time, that is where they plan for the media to be. And they are even saying that there may only be one pool reporter at any given time in the gallery. So we're not sure exactly how strict that might be, but it does look like it will be fairly strict. So the Capitol has already put air purification in both of the chambers, but they need to still install it in committee rooms, conference rooms, and in every office. So, you know what? I want to say one more thing before I go past this, because there's some notes that I have here from the Senate that I did not include here, and I want to make sure that we talk about it. So they have a protocol for the opening day being tested, who you're allowed to have with you in both the House and the Senate. The Senate has decided that they will then take off that next week starting on the 18th, and starting on January 25th is when Senate Finance will start to meet. Then they anticipate that they will probably alternate weeks for committee hearings. Now, this is something I have written in bold. bold, so make sure you listen up here. The Senate is saying that those who testify in person will be required to sign up online 3 days in advance. They'll need to test 24 hours in advance. Then they'll receive a QR code that they show at the Capitol entrance. So that is going to be something that you're going to have to keep in mind if you're wanting to testify. Also in bold, I have there will be no big lobby days, which takes me to, what does this mean for us? So we had over 400 people on a Tuesday last session at the Capitol talking about marijuana policy, and it was really awesome. But sadly, that will not be happening this year. So we are thinking of some ingenuitive ways, which Heather will talk about next, so I won't get into that. It also means that likely you will need to do virtual meetings with your legislators and staff. So making those appointments in advance, doing Zoom calls like this, I think that's really the wave of how this session is going to look. Heather had mentioned our educational exhibits at the start of this that we put out. We do still plan to do the educational exhibits. We have put in our applications, which have been approved. However, at any moment, they could decide to not do those. But the way that it'll work is it will have to be a totally unmanned educational exhibit this session. We also anticipate that it will need to be contactless and digital handouts and materials because they're wanting to reduce the interactions as much as possible. Additionally, Lisa talked about testimony. It's extremely important to prepare in advance. You can use our testimony link submission, and we can help you get that going and rolling so that you're ready for the session. We're not sure, will they allow virtual? Will it only be in person? So no matter what, we will be creating testimony, either virtual binders or real binders. We'll see where we're at when that time comes. And also, as I've said several times, just prepare for these guidelines to change at any moment. We don't really know what could come next. And so for that reason, it's extremely important that you guys stay tuned, make sure that you're registered to our newsletters, and make sure that you're getting our updates following us on social media as well. So session starts today, and we have until the end of May to really make a difference and an impact in our state under these extreme circumstances. So I want to thank all of you guys for tuning into this portion because I know we need to expect the unexpected.
So as we know, this legislative session is going to be different than any of us have ever experienced, and we're going to have to take action how we can. So what can we do right now? Number one, I want to encourage you to focus on your senators. Of course, our representatives are incredibly important, and we do need to be contacting them to shore up their support. But we were able to pass legislation out of the House last time around, and the Senate is where it stalled. So we want to make sure that our senators feel confident in the fact that their constituents support this policy, that they understand it well, and that they can help put pressure on leadership to ensure that our legislation has a hearing and that it proceeds to a vote in the Senate. So make sure you're focusing on your senators and building a relationship there. As Lisa talked about earlier, crafting your testimony, doing it now. Don't wait until the committee hearing. Do it now when you have more time to get feedback and to really explore the impact that these laws have had on your life. And we obviously don't want to be scrambling right before the hearing, but you can also use your testimony to share with your legislators. You can share them with the committee members in advance. And even as I've mentioned down the list is op-eds and letters to the editor. Once you have your testimony crafted, you can morph that into other purposes. Submit it to the local newspaper as an op-ed with the reasons why you want to see these laws changed. Letters to the editor are traditionally in response to another article. So if you see an article about cannabis legislation, go ahead and write a letter to the editor. It's generally very short and sweet, and send it to them. That's your response to an article that they published. And often you can get your story published in the newspaper right there in your local area. That's a really great way to kind of dual purpose this testimony for the legislature and for earning support for our movement in the general population. As we've talked about scheduling meetings with legislators, you may be able to schedule an appointment at the Capitol, but you may not. Sometimes some legislators are going to be very strict on the COVID restrictions and wanting to be safe and taking virtual meetings. So don't be afraid of a Zoom meeting, as has been mentioned. Scheduling it with the staffer or with the legislator, him or herself, can be incredibly impactful. Social media, as we all know, social media can be a beautiful thing or a terrible thing. And it's our job as advocates to make sure that we utilize this tool to advance our cause and use it to build community, use it to share meaningful information. We can drop links in different comment sections to news articles that are posted, or your legislators, when they post about something and you want to respond and relate that to cannabis, leave them links to other news articles, reports that have been published, etc. This is a big opportunity not only to influence the person that you're talking to directly, but also everyone that's watching that thread can have those resources, can take action. So drop links to our action pages that help people to connect with their lawmakers. You become a force multiplier. And when I close out here saying mobilizing others, we can only contact our legislators so many times. And many of us are so passionate about it. We want to call them every day and find out if they've changed their mind yet. We want to make sure that we're persistent and that we are building that relationship, but we don't want to feel like we're spinning our wheels. And so you can take that energy you have for this movement, that passion for reforming marijuana laws, and activate others in your social circle, whether it's social media or if it's folks in your neighborhood. We can give people an opportunity to take action themselves after we've done so. So with that, I want to thank everyone for attending. We have been answering questions in the Q&A chat, but also this is our contact information. If you want to be in touch with further questions about the process or about the policy, we're excited to be working with so many people, such a diverse movement of people that care about this issue for lots of different reasons, all coming together to change laws this legislative session. I want to ask Jax if you have any other comments that you want to make before we close out.
Well, I think that this is going to be an exciting session, and I'm really looking forward to virtually working with everyone. I'm a little sad to not see everyone's faces, I have to be honest, but I know that as a community, we have overcome so much, and we have excelled in trying to adapt and adjust, and I know we will continue to do so. So I have a lot of hope moving forward, but I know we also have a lot of work to do. So hopefully we've properly equipped all of you guys watching today. And yes, if you have any questions, please email any of us. We would love to help you along the way and get you any resources that you might need.
Great. Well, and thank you so much for all of your work this year. You've done an incredible job of overcoming the hurdles of not being able to convene. And over the years, Texas Normal has done great work. So grateful for you and all the work that y'all have done, your whole team, the Texas Normal board, and all of our coalition partners who have been working diligently over the years to bring us to the point where we are now with real opportunity to change these laws this legislative session. It's going to be hard and it's going to be a lot different than it is usually. But as Jax mentioned earlier, make sure you're signed up for our email list so that you get notifications in your email box as soon as things are happening, as soon as a bill moves and we need you to take action. And make sure you're sharing that with others. So with that, I want to thank you very much for joining us, and feel free to reach out if you have further questions, concerns, or need help crafting that testimony. Thank you so much for your support of the cause.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.